Does one best negotiate Trump? And by the way, your former colleague Ben Wallace was on just half an hour ago saying that actually it was a mistake for Keir Starmer to go to Washington with his invitation from the King, proffered up front. That should have been kept as an incentive.
Well, look, I think I'd say a couple of things, Matt. I think I don't think the UK is necessarily in a bad position here. I think we've got a lot of options. Actually, being outside of the EU presents us with more options. I think we're in a better place because of that. We've got membership.
Give me some specific examples of where we might benefit from that.
Yeah, for a start, we're going to be slated for lower tariffs than the EU, but also we're kind of hooked in now to more free trade alliances like the CPTPP free trade group that wouldn't have been possible when we were members of the EU. And the ability to do our own deal with the United States would not have been possible then. So there's a lot of options there. I mean, I think what the UK should be doing is broadly what the government is doing, but I think they started late. One of the interesting things about Georgia Maloney's visit this past week is that she, of course, was one of Donald Trump's first visitors back in the period that you'll know well, the transition period. And I think Starmer missed a trick, really, by not going over at that time. I appreciate protocol is that you wait for the US president to be inaugurated and so on. But I think protocol, is out the window these days with the Trump White House. So I would have gone early. I would have started those talks. At the moment, I think we're behind Japan and Korea in the queue. And I would have made sure the UK was right at the front of that queue, as we were back in 2020 when we started those talks with Trump. So I think, broadly speaking, Matt, I think what I would do is to negotiate a deal with Trump. Really important, the deal isn't just to avoid tariffs, though, because to return to the status quo before the tariffs, the UK has got some long-standing asks in the US when it comes to trade, like business visas, like access for UK legal services, accountancy. These really kind of quite high value added. There's a lot more money actually in things like those services than in agriculture, for example. So I think the UK should do that while still being committed to free trade globally as well.
And should we hold out, for instance, an exemption on the digital services tax as one of our bargaining chips? And should we be prepared to impose that tax if they don't give us what we want?
Well, look, I mean, I've personally never particularly been a fan of the digital services tax, I'll be frank. But look, it's not my decision. I would say there's a couple of things the UK could compromise on. But the things that I wouldn't compromise on are, for example, our food standards and so on. But I think I would find areas to compromise, for example, on the digital services tax. I think the most difficult parts of the negotiation, Matt, will actually be neither of those. I think the most difficult parts will be things like platform liability. The UK is going in the direction of place like Meta being responsible for what's on their sites, which is quite difficult for the US. So I think actually the most difficult areas won't be the NHS, chlorinated chicken, hormone beef, all those kind of things. It'll be things like platform liability and sort of tech and digital issues, I think, as well.
Greg Hand, stay there. I want to bring in Shaista Aziz. As I said, she's an anti-racism and equalities campaigner and also part of the Stop Trump coalition. Shaista, it's good to have you on the programme. If this government gets a decent trade deal, which is in the interests of the British public and can be sold as such by Keir Starmer, do you think that might persuade you to tone down some of the protests that you're planning for his state visit, possibly in September?
Hi there, Matt. Thanks for having me on. So what we do know is that obviously Trump has said he's coming to the UK in September, and we have been inundated with people contacting us from across the country, including American citizens here in the UK as well, who are outraged by what Donald Trump has done in the 100 days he's been in power, and they want to protest him. So I think that the protests are going to be very loud, very diverse, good humoured, and the images will go around the world. And frankly, they will be offering a lot of hope to people, including those in the USA who are absolutely appalled at what Donald Trump has been up to in the last few months.
I mean, Donald Trump is about much more than just a trade deal. He's about just about everything else as well. Values inside the United States, attacks on the universities, attacks on freedom of speech, forced deportations, challenged by the Supreme Court, you name it. It's a very, very long laundry list. Do you think that he should be coming at all? I mean, would you rather him not come, or would you rather him come and protest his arrival?
Well, I think it's an embarrassment that he has been offered this state visit by the Prime Minister. And, the fact that it happened so early on was really an attempt to try and appease Donald Trump. And Donald Trump has gone on record to say that world leaders have been, quote, trying to kiss his ass in relation to getting a better deals regarding trade. So, the fact that the UK now it really looks out of step, not only in terms of what the British public want, which they loathe Donald Trump, but also global leaders who are, tearing their hair out, trying to work out how to deal with this man. So when it comes to trade, of course, we need to find a good trade deal for the UK. Will we find one? Absolutely nobody knows. These trade negotiations obviously happening behind closed doors. They're happening with secrecy applied to them. But we know that the agricultural issue, there's been attempts in the past in Donald Trump's first presidency, where he wanted to flood chlorinated chicken and other items that the British public don't want onto our country.
Right. Greg Hans is shaking his head in disbelief at that, but he also smiling earlier when Shaista spoke about the protests. So let me before you respond to the trade stuff, do you think it was right to proffer an invitation from the King for a state visit when that is what Donald Trump really wants, and it should have been kept as an incentive up the government's sleeve? Greg.
But look, I don't know, Matt, to be honest. I don't really know on that.
Come on, tell us what you think. You must have been thinking about that. Give us an opinion.
I think that, look, I think the Britain has attractions, and the royal family is one of the reasons people come to the country in general. So I'm not really going to criticise the Prime Minister for that in terms of how exactly he did that. The thing that made me smile though, Matt, or shake my head was it actually wasn't Donald Trump who asked us to take chlorinated chicken.
It was Barack Obama.
It was actually Barack Obama. You're right, in 2014 during the TTIP negotiations. So in fact, funny enough, the Trump White House, when I did the negotiations back in 2020, I said to them up front that, we're not going to change our SPS standards. That's kind of the technical term for food safety, animal welfare standards. And they're totally fine with that. He was Robert Lighthizer, the then US Trade Representative. He understood that. So it was actually Obama who asked us to change, not Trump, as it turns out.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember talking to Obama's trade representative in London, who came to London. He said, if you think you're going to get an easy deal out of us just because you love our president, forget about it. We're going to drive a very tough bargain. And so there are some continuities there. Exactly. But the point is this, Greg Hans, that we're now dealing with a US president who seems to be rowing against some of the fundamental values that we in this country espouse, hold dear. Ukraine, which I talked to Ben Wallace about an hour ago, is one of those things. The other one is freedom of speech. It's deporting citizens who've got the right to stay in the country, attacking universities. You name it. On so many different levels, Trump has declared war on the institutions that have made America great. And are we okay with hosting someone who does that?
I think yes, we are, Matt. I agree with you. Actually,
you might be. Okay.
I'm certainly not a Trump fan, I'm much more a fan of the old, sort of Ronald Reagan, George Bush version of republicanism. I'll be frank, but nonetheless, the UK, we have to operate in our national interest, and I think it's in our national interest to do a trade deal with the United States, and that has been the case whether it's been Barack Obama, whether it's been Joe Biden, whether it's been Donald Trump. I think through all of these, it will be an international agreement that should bind both countries in for some time. So I think we've got to think beyond the next 4 years of Trump and think, what is in the long-term UK national interest, which is why I repeat the point. It's really important that any trade deal doesn't just avoid the tariffs. We need to get something long-term substantial out of this.
And I think that's why it's probably taking a little bit longer than we thought. But just briefly, Greg, are you happy to see tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people protesting on the streets of British cities against the arrival of this guest, probably in September?
Well, I think I fundamentally believe in the right to protest, the right to people to be out there making their point. I'm not sure really how effective it's going to be, though, because everybody knows that Donald Trump is the sort of person who attracts some supporters and quite a lot of opponents. So I don't think the demonstration is going to teach us anything we don't already know.
Shaista, final question to you. One thing I do know about Donald Trump, especially having once interviewed him, is that he does love attention, whether it's negative or positive. there was the old Oscar Wilde thing. There's one thing worse than being, denigrated behind your back, and that is not being denigrated at all, or not being spoken about. In a sense, silence, a vacuum of noise is the worst thing you can do to Donald Trump.
Fundamentally disagree. There's been a vacuum of silence which has really allowed the politics of Donald Trump to gain traction not only in the US but across Europe. We're seeing a rise in the far right. We're seeing free speech being attacked. We're seeing the most hideous commentary coming from Donald Trump in relation to the carnage in Gaza and also in Ukraine. So people are, Donald Trump is not a guest of the people.
Yeah.
He may be a guest of the Prime Minister, but he will definitely get a good welcome from the people.
But what I'm saying is, just very briefly, your response is that actually the worst thing you can do to him is not to pay any attention at all.
The worst thing for Donald Trump is to see the type of protests that we organised the last time he was here. His fragile ego is very bruised, and I think he will get another bruising this time as well.